We have John Paul, who wants to talk to us from Washington. John Paul, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Good evening. I was just calling in. I guess I am a theist. I believe in God, but the reason I believe in God is because in a decision tree on the first question, I've decided that between the ideas of accident or design, that design makes more sense. So that's the reason.
Okay. So in terms of, do you mean just like the design of everything, like Earth, people?
Well, I mean everything from, fine tuning of the universe down to theological arguments that ultimately, if you take the decision one step at a time, I do think epistemology wise, a decision tree is a good approach. And it provides for that first question to be answered, because in the decision tree, of course, once you decide it's designed, or if you say it's accidental, you have to go down that tree and down that branch. And so in that method, I do think that between the term accidental or designed, there's good evidence that it can't be accidental.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. You want to start with this conversation, Trust but Verify? Because
sure.
I think you'd be a great person to start with asking questions.
Yeah. All right. Thanks,
I wonder
Dan.
why I think that,
because I ask a lot of questions. So my first question would be how do you define, or how do you define accidental?
So I would say without intent or purpose. So kind of the traditional version. I mean, accidental is a term used by scientists, even atheist scientists often.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, in so many ways. And is it your opinion that, say, like the evolutionary process is without intent or purpose? Would you say that?
Oh no, I do believe. I believe that there are reasons why evolution works. And I do believe in evolution, and I think either through natural selection. I know there's some other theories out there too, but I think there is a motive for evolution. We can see enough evidence to see that evolution is real. So.
Okay. So you do believe in evolution, but it sounds like you assert that it was God that started evolution, or as a process.
Correct. I would say it's part of his design.
Okay. Why do you think God used evolution other than some other process?
I think he probably thought it was a pretty good way. I mean, I don't know. You're asking me an opinion question on God, but I think he probably thought it was a pretty good way to key in life in certain environments and allow that to almost bake together with the environment. So that obviously through natural selection, the strongest rise to the surface. And so I think that does seem to be a pretty intelligent way to go.
Well, I think one thing about natural selection is that, because there's things like selection pressure, and only if Forrest Valkai were here to really explain this out. But I mean, he would just do dynamite at this. But essentially, it's not always, my understanding is it's not always the quote unquote strongest. It's just the one that has the advantage, and that could change, just depending on environment, number of predators, all kinds of things. And so, I don't know if it's so much that, or maybe that's what you meant. However,
yeah, I did. I'm sorry. Your word is better than stronger. I agree.
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, do you think that, wouldn't it be fair to say that, well, actually, I should probably go back and
can I jump in on this?
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead.
Because I want to know, because this is an interesting idea and outlook that evolution is, and we're staying on evolution on this one, but I think it's a good example. Being sort of designed by God. Is it your opinion then that God sort of preordains all events? Like he's sort of the designer and controls everything that happens? How does that work?
Boy, that's a good fundamental question. I would probably have to say there's a certain amount of uncertainty, but I guess if we get real esoteric about it, because he exists in all parts of time, he's not sitting there waiting, while evolution occurs. I have to say that I believe that he is timeless. So therefore, it's hard to put that sort of structure to that question. Is that fair enough to say?
I think maybe. I guess so. For me, it's like evolution as we're describing it, right? Like we brought up the example of selection pressures, right? That's environmental factors, what we would call natural factors, right? Affecting and changing the organisms around them. But if God is sort of the system designer for all of this, it kind of makes you wonder, like, well, like who's actually in charge here, right? Is it nature that's doing these things, or is it, if it's God actually doing these things, is he the architect for these things, right?
Yeah. And I was thinking, like, in terms of like, do you, and just to kind of piggyback on that just a tiny bit, because I don't want to overwhelm you, John, but like, do you think that God is just kind of sitting back and letting evolution do its thing, or, does he actually have a hand in what's going on?
Well, I think as it relates to nature, if you do believe in a God, you'd have to say that he created nature too. So therefore, all the fundamental principles and forces from going back to fine tuning, entropy, and all sorts of different things that he laid the foundation of. In all reality, it's not necessarily God letting nature do anything, because if he's created nature, then it means he's had an effect on that too. So it's one and the same, wouldn't it be? Life and nature, or biological life and natural processes. I mean, if he's created it all, then technically those two things are the same.
If he has. And so I think the big thing for me would be then, what do we have what do we have to compare to that we could say this is design? Well, like, what does something that's not designed look like that's natural?
Yeah. How would we be able to know if something is natural, in other words, not created by God, or something that is created by God definitively, right?
Yeah.
Well, but that's why I try to use the word accidental instead of not designed, because not designed, doesn't that violate the principle of sufficient reason? Because it's not, if not designed isn't an explanation, it's simply the absence of one. So therefore, if you say accidental, that is a claim. That's a corresponding claim. So I guess, I don't know, that would be my response.
I think what we're getting,
you start to pigeonhole yourself into that framework of saying it's just not something versus it is something versus.
Well, I think what we're getting at, though, what I was saying is what we're getting at is that how do you, maybe the term is not, maybe the term, we could use a better term of not accidental. So maybe we can use something better than that. But what we're getting at, I think Dan and I are asking you, is how do you distinguish between something that is designed and something that is like designed by God, and something that it just happens by nature? Because the other part of like selection pressure is, I don't think like evolutionary biologists would actually call it quote unquote accidental. The reason being is that there is some intent in there. Like, for example, with selection pressure, the organisms are, making choices. There's, for example, selection pressure determines like mating habits, like who they mate with, and where they migrate to, and things of that sort, right? So there are some things that are intentional that are happening. So it's not entirely like just whoop, this just completely happened, out of the blue, out of nowhere. You see what I'm saying, John?
I do, especially on the biological side. If I shift it just a little to, let's just call, go to the fine tuning. Let's take entropy, right? We know things going from a low state to a high state of entropy. We have mathematical formulas that give us probabilities of that occurring. It's well founded. Penrose himself lays out in his book the specific number, and that number is astronomical. I mean, it's almost hard to even say, but it's so astronomical that his point, although he was making a different point, but in a sense, the point is, as it relates to that, it's so improbable that fine tuning didn't exist based upon that number alone. So therefore, if you believe in that number, and I mean, we're talking a number that I did a AI thing on it one time where I said, if it's a 14-point font, how how many zeros until you got to an actual number, and you went around the known universe several million times before you got to the single number after the zeros. And so the problem I have is that to me is evidence, right? If somebody was looking at DNA for a murder suspect, I mean, just that DNA would say, well, I can make a reasonable assumption this person committed this crime. And that number isn't even close to the one issue related to fine tuning related to entropy. So therefore, between the design or the theist and atheist, I realize atheist isn't a claim position, but that's where I say, if you frame it accidental versus design, you start to get some compelling pieces of evidence mathematically. Well, tons of things, all the way down to the teleological, where we're looking at a moon that somehow keeps the dark side of our planet bright while also controlling, tides and other things. It's just, and the spectrum of everything in between. I mean, you could literally layer it one by one by one by one as you go, and it just becomes more improbable, more improbable, more improbable, more improbable. But I do agree that once you get down to the biological life on Earth, after you get over that little clumsy thing about, the first cell coming out of a chemical compound.
I got you.
Once you get over that piece, then quite frankly, it is a little smoother sailing.
Yeah. So here's a struggle that I have with fine tuning. So one of the struggles I have with fine tuning is that, like one piece of it is that I think of like the nearest star from our solar system, which I think is Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri, something like that. And it's about 4 or 5 light years away, which is just a ridiculous amount of space, right? A ridiculous distance. And so if this universe were fine-tuned now, would you say that it's fine-tuned for life, or how exactly, what is it fine-tuned for in your estimation?
That's a very good question. I guess it's fine-tuned for the possibility of life. That would be one element.
Possibility of life.
Total sum. I can't say that's the sum of it. But I can say that I would say that's one element.
Okay. So the problem I have with that is, like, for example, like we have radiation in outer space, right? Mm-hmm. And some of this radiation does hit Earth, and we can draw a correlation between like outer space radiation and cancer, for example. The sun causes cancer. And so if this place were fine-tuned for the possibility of life, why are there so many goddamn things killing us, trying to kill us?
Well, let me slightly reframe that. Are you saying that life isn't successful? If the goal is life, if the goal is, let's just say humans, we've been pretty successful in general. I understand on an individual basis you make that point, and it's a point. I understand that point.
It seems to be successful.
You can't claim that it's not successful.
Well, we seem to be successful
locally,
despite.
we could claim it's successful.
Yeah, locally.
If you look at the entire universe, it's a pretty bad job, right?
Pretty
at least
desolate.
What we've seen in the Milky Way, because we seem to be the only guys out here, right? It seems that the universe is more finely tuned for rocks to orbit around stars in space than it is for people to live on them, right? Because how many of those do we have going on?
Well, but I guess I don't know, do you feel like we know that? I mean, I'm not trying to say I believe in any of these things. I mean, I'm presuming there's something out there. I don't think many people don't think there's not a fairly abundant life out in the universe.
Right, but if we're talking about probability, like the fine tuning are specific, and Roger Penrose is a smarter man than I'll ever be. Okay, like that's fine. But the fine tuning argument, as I understand it, is the probability that the constants are the way that they are, right? Like what if the speed of light was 5 meters per second instead of whatever, right? And how we get these things, like what, the one is I don't know if it can be any different, right? The universe might just be how it is, but more importantly than that, if we're talking from a pure probability standpoint, which is what you brought into this conversation, right? It seems to be more likely than not that that we're the way that we are rather than we aren't. Then it seems like the universe, like is doing a really good job of trying to keep us out, right? Like if you were just going on probability and you say, what was the intent of this God for this universe, it would be to make a lot of stars and gas giants and space debris. Humans are just an accident by comparison, right? We seem to have we seem to not be as interested in that because we could imagine a universe that could be way more tuned for life than what we currently have, right?
But let me ask you this: how do you know this is it? I mean, how do you know what we see in the universe right now is God's plan? Or a designer's plan, meaning we may be just at a point in time where it looks like that, and maybe in the later it's not going to look like that. I mean, not to invoke the Judaic God, but fill the earth and subdue it, and then fill the universe and subdue it. How do we know the plan isn't ongoing?
I mean, it may be a plan that doesn't work on human timescales, but one has to ask why a God has to work on any kind of time scale and why not be instant in some sense.
Well,
right?
that kind of begs the question that there's even a plan in the first place.
Yeah.
Because isn't it also possible, John, that there could have been no plan? Like, even if there was a God, even if we grant that, isn't it possible that there was no plan, that this God maybe just created this accidentally, just didn't mean to, and it just happened, it just happened to be a universe? Isn't that possible?
Yeah, I suppose that is possible, just like, any rational argument can be possible.
Yeah. And I think the point I'm getting to is that if we start looking at possibilities, like anything could be possible, right?
Yeah.
There could be multiple universes. There could be, there could be all kinds of different possibilities. And so I think the big thing that I kind of want to go back to what I was asking you before is, if you're saying the fine tuning, like, it could not have been in any other way, because I think that's part of what the fine tuning argument is as well. Like, if anything is just off by even just a tiny fraction, then, life wouldn't exist. Right. But again, what other universe do we have to compare it to verify that that's true? That's in my name: trust but verify.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's where the whole multiverse hypothesis comes from. I mean, that trying to explain that factor. Science realizes that's a problem, and so they go out trying to seek an answer to that problem. So there's where the multiverse, hypothesis starts to try to say there's actually lots of universes, and this one just happens to be the right one. I mean, there has been some failure in that hypothesis, though. In fact, Roger Penrose just gave a whole presentation of why he doesn't believe that. But and there are different ideas, but at the end of the day, it is a probability thing, right? It does come down to, there is mathematical probabilities here at work, and a rational conclusion, I think, is that a designer is rational. That is a rational thought, because mathematically, the accident is irrational from a probability standpoint. Now, there's other ideas. I'm not saying there's not ideas that we can't float and think through and mull over, but it's not super irrational to believe in a designer. That would be
I just think it's difficult for me to comprehend this idea. We're kind of going back to this again, but it's more just, what is a rational design versus an irrational design?
Yeah, exactly. Because we have nothing to compare it to, and I think that's our position. That's the part we're struggling with. Am I right, Dan? Are you struggling with that? Yeah.
Well, because okay, so here's an example, right? There's been evidence that there's some planets in the universe, at least one that I was reading about, and I think some others, that are like covered in diamonds, right? Which is like kind of cool. That's kind of interesting. As a fact, right now, we know that there's more planets covered in diamonds than that are covered in humans, right? I mean, you could make the argument that the universe was rationally designed so that diamonds could be made.
Make diamonds, yeah.
And how could I argue against that with this logic? If we're just using people and life as an example of why it must be, a thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I guess that's where I go back to the decision tree. I mean, all these things could be talked about at different levels, which is why the first proposition, essentially accident and design. But, I agree. I mean, that could be a level of branch, is it designed for humans? That's a good logical question. I guess I'm still trying to say that it's not an irrational belief to say at that first, in a decision tree, the very first question, is it accidental or design? I just don't think it's irrational. So I understand what you just said, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that in itself could be another discussion point on that side of a branch of the tree.
I think the other part, and tell me if I'm wrong, Dan, but there's we're kind of smuggling in an assumption here, is that it's either or. It's either accidental or it's designed. Like, can't there be, what if the universe always existed?
Yeah, I was kind of talking about this before, because I don't know if the constants of the universe can be changed. They might just be it, right? I think the fine tuning argument kind of relies on this assumption that these constants didn't have to be the way that they are, that they could have been something else. But I'm not even fully convinced that that's the case. But as you mentioned, without the black and white thinking, I could design a computer, but I can give it to you, Trust, and you can do stuff with it, and I don't know what you're going to do with it, right? So like you can design all kinds of things, and other things could get in the way. So if that's the case, maybe that could also be the case with the universe. How do we know that anything that's happened in this system, the system could be designed, but what if something else interferes? We're already talking about natural selection and other kinds of pressures, sort of emergent properties, right, within the system. At what point do we say that where we're at is designed?
I think the laws of entropy prohibit the idea of it always existing. That's why Big Bang cosmology has probably been the most likely truth. But anyhow, sorry.
Sorry, say that one more time. You're saying entropy prevents what from existing?
Entropy cannot, the way entropy works in energy, it can't constantly exist because the state would devolve too quickly. So, I mean, and if it always existed, then all of a sudden now you're dealing with unfathomable time, anyhow. I'm not a physicist, but
no, it's okay. I'm not a physicist either. I'm just trying to understand how that relates to the argument. You're saying because the universe can't just be the way that it is?
Well, I don't think very many people believe. I think there is an idea out there, a hypothesis that it might be always existing. There's that idea floating around, but the theory of Big Bang theory is the most widely accepted. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. And I'm not contesting that. I'm more just saying, but I don't even know if the constants themselves are something that are mutable or immutable, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that has much to do with I guess there's a debate on how, like, the origins of the Big Bang theory, right? Because, like, did the constants come in before that, or were they a part of, like, the universe's creation process? You'd have to ask, I don't know, Carl Sagan. I don't know. I'm not the guy for that, right? But, like, again, I'm not sure. I don't know. You get what I'm trying to say here, Trust. It's more just like, yeah.
And I thought of another angle that we could kind of approach this from. John, would you agree, John, that if God is all powerful and all knowing, he could have created any kind of universe consistent with his goals?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So couldn't he have simply created electrons with minds that exist in perfect awareness of his glory?
He could have.
So why would we need planets and gases and space debris, all the stuff Dan listed? Why would we need that then? If that's all he could have done?
Because he prefers it that way.
He prefers it. Well, how do we know that though?
Well, we don't. I could never know that. Answer that question.
Yeah, right.
We're talking about something that neither one of us could ever.
Okay.
Unless I guess we have a conversation with God or the designer.
Right. But you would agree that electrons with minds would fulfill God's plan, because I think in the end, well, according to the Christian worldview, it's for God's glory. It's to glorify God, right? So couldn't electrons with minds do that?
Couldn't electrons with minds? I guess. I mean, it could, but I guess it comes down to a preference and or optimal design according to what his plan is.
Okay.
I mean,
so
I agree that it could. I'm not, but I don't know how we'd ever get down to that truth of whether that's
Well, yeah, but I mean, that kind of blows the fine tuning constants right out of the water, because if God could have just done it that way, then it doesn't really make fine tuning, you know, the fine tuning constants don't really matter at that point.
Let me put my Christian hat on though.
All right.
Trust, because God may not be interested in what's most optimal, right? Like his preferences may not be optimal, and that could still be consistent with his nature, right? So I don't know if that really, because like I see what you're saying. You're proposing that God's ultimate goal is to have everybody kind of praise him endlessly, right? So why not just get to the point of that? But maybe that's not his ultimate goal. Like maybe it's something else.
It's not.
Ultimately,
it may not be.
That does bring up the question though, because if we don't know what God's goal is, it's hard to know what the design is for, right? How do we know what's designed for what if we don't know what the goal is? For the vast majority of Earth's existence, humans weren't here, right? So it seems like if we're part of that goal, we're a very small part of that process, and maybe he wants it that way. But it is a little sus. I agree. It's kind of hard to justify.
Yeah. Well, the point I was trying to make, Dan, is that if the, you know, because if God could have created this universe any way he wanted, and if it really is just about creating minds, he could have created minds without matter, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, why fine tuning constants instead of just creating minds, like electrons with minds? That's all you had to do.
Yeah.
So if the constants are contingent, then they're arbitrary. And so that's what I'm going to get back. So turning back to you, John, if God could have created this universe in any way possible, and he could have created electrons with minds, that makes the constants contingent, which means they're arbitrary. So how is this evidence of intention?
Well, I guess I'll invoke something that Carl Sagan once demonstrated related to, and it's not my point to talk about dimensions, but just say we're in a three-dimensional universe and we are the creatures of that universe. There could, in fact, be universes or dimensions in which there are minds that aren't physically based. And I would even have to say the Judaic God promotes such an idea. So I guess insofar as our universe is concerned, and our dimension, that we are the beings that the designer sought to create. And I can't even, and I couldn't even necessarily tell you that, I mean, if you went across the whole universe, what kind of life you'd see. I mean, it might be, there may be all sorts of different types of life. So you might be right. Maybe we will one day find an electron with a mind that of its own. I don't know the answer to that question.
Right. But see, and I think kind of going back to what Dan was saying, you know, Dan was kind of playing devil's advocate with me. See, the thing is that what would you say the likelihood is of, you know, if you said, well, yeah, there could be electrons out there with minds, right? Well, why are there all different sorts of casings, bodies for these minds then? You know, why, you know, you've got us in human form with minds, then you've got these electrons with minds. And since you believe in evolution, it's possible crows could develop into, you know, have the same brain capacity as humans to have minds. And then they start worshiping a god, you know? So I think what I'm trying to get to is this kind of goes back to the question, what do you compare it to? How do you distinguish between this being, in your words, accidental, quote unquote, versus intentional?
Well, I guess I'm framing that first question because everything you guys are asking is great questions and for fun to pontificate on, but those are branch-like questions. But the first question related to accident and design looks at the probability, right? And it does look at what is more probable, what's better to believe between those two propositions. And the problem with accident is, oddly enough, I could come up with a million different pontificating type questions related to accident in a similar way you guys just did, because why is it we're here the way we are, and all that kind of thing, and why does so many things make sense? I mean, you talked about the sun and the radiation and all that, and I could counter that with the Earth and how the magnetic field's protected. And I mean, in every facet. This is the problem. Every facet that we look at, there seems to be intention. Now, is it perfect design? I don't know. Maybe it's not. Is it in its final form? Maybe it's not. But there's so much intention where one thing counteracts another thing, or this does this. The recycling of carbon on our surface through tectonic plates that we don't see in any other planet other than ours. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I would even say this. There's something called thermohaline regulation, which basically allows the planet to radiate heat, disperse it. And that's the exact same thing that human or living life does, mammals particularly, use in their bodies, because we use blood and fluids to regulate our heat through our extremities. And the Earth has virtually the exact same design as it goes to thermal regulation. So there is just, I mean, it's like everywhere you look, it feels purposeful. So
okay,
and that's why. No.
Well, I mean, again, purpose for who, right? Dinosaurs lived on this earth way longer than we did, and the conditions for life were great for them for a long period of time. I'm sure the dinosaurs, if they, got brains like we did, they would have thought, gee, the earth was designed for us, but, they're not here anymore. So it's like, it's hard for me to, it's the anthropic principle. You're familiar with the anthropic principle, right? This idea that, I'm sure you are, because you're obviously educated and you've been studying this. Like, this idea that like our observations are going to conform to what we think is best for human beings, because we're human beings and we're limited in our understanding, and we're going to limit our observations based on what makes the most sense for us in our conditions. But truthfully, we're the subject of a very small time and place in the grand scheme of the universe. If anything, our existence and our lack of existence at other places kind of informs the idea that we are kind of an accident, that we aren't intended by design. Otherwise, the universe as a whole might be more accommodating to us. Sure, we can talk about Earth and as it exists right now, and already it's inhospitable in many places. Like we can't live in Antarctica, except if you're on a research base. But even then, that's highly modified situations. We can't naturally live there. Various places like that. So probability, I get, but probability for who, right? For us, I don't know. That's just one aspect, I guess, of a bigger picture here. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, and I understand. I understand your question, and it's a hard question to answer, because I mean, I could just say life, and varied forms of life, but again, I do. My only point, I think, to this, my only argument, and everything you're asking, Stain, I understand. My only point to this discussion is starting from, you guys talk about epistemology, and starting from that decision tree and analyzing the root question that then can lead to more discussion down the line, as we kind of ventured here in this discussion. So, and I just don't think it's as unreasonable as I think it's inferred sometimes in the atheist community. I think that even though I know that the idea of being an atheist is just lack of belief in God, I think there's an inference that it's kind of ridiculous to think there's a God. And if you say
I wouldn't
there's
go
a
that far.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wouldn't go that far. I don't think every atheist infers that, because there are like, for example, I'm an agnostic atheist. And so I don't know if God exists, and I don't believe that God exists. So, and there is a spectrum to atheism. So I wouldn't say that every atheist believes that it's, what was the word to use? Preposterous, ridiculous, or something
Ridiculous.
like that. Ridiculous. Yeah.
You're right. I shouldn't have, if I said everyone, I apologize. That wasn't my, I do, as I watch some of these shows, because I like watching your guys' show and other shows. But there is a little bit of a, I don't know. I won't even argue that point. I agree.
Okay. John, would you say, do you think that the constants were necessary for the universe?
Yes.
Or are necessary?
Yes.
Okay. Then if they're necessary, then how is it that a designer was free to choose them?
How was it the designer was free to choose them? I would say that just like fine tuning anything, he created the constants, then tuned them. Because the constants is one thing, but the constant tuning is another thing, right?
Well, again, we because earlier you agreed that God could have just created electrons with minds, or just a universe just with just minds floating around, right? So that just kind of tells us right there that these constants weren't necessary, because he could have used any numbers, any kind of constants or whatever, right?
Well, that's where I was trying to relate about the dimensions. About I was invoking
I understand.
Sagan's point about right.
Yeah,
if we're a three-dimensional, there may be other dimensions. I mean, even the Judaic God, again in the Bible, we're talking about angels and spirit beings, whatever that is. We may be just the product of a three-dimensional universe.
Yeah, I understand that. But what my point is that if you're asserting that these constants were necessary, that means that this God didn't really have a choice. And so if this designer didn't have a choice, because then he could have chosen any constants, he could have chosen any format to make this universe. Like, again, just electrons with minds, with nothing else, right? He could have chosen one electron with a mind, right?
Yes.
That could have been the entire universe.
I'll clarify. I don't mean necessary only because he controls the framework.
But that's not necessary.
Yeah, what makes it necessary at that point, right? I'm picking up what Trust is putting down here, because if he is a God and he can do anything, why does the conditions we exist have to be necessary for life? Why couldn't it be other kinds of
Could
conditions?
have been anything else. Yeah.
Well, I think because but it depends on what his design intent is then.
Because which we don't know, right?
For a non
I don't even think it
system.
does.
He wanted a system, right?
Well, see, here's the thing. I don't think it does depend on the intent, because again, if God could have chosen this universe any way he wanted to, he could have designed this any way he wanted to, then that by definition makes the constants that you're talking about not necessary but contingent, because they could have been anything. He could have designed this any way he wanted to. He could have been a two-dimensional, could have been a six-dimensional.
Yeah, but who's to say it isn't? He did design it any way he wanted to, and this is the design.
That's the problem, isn't it? Though
that's the problem, though.
You're saying, did he need the constants? Did the designer need the constants?
Well, that's what necessary is.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
so because that's what
they cease being necessary if they're not necessary, right? Like if a God could do something else with it, then they're not necessary, right?
It's kind of like saying if you're trying to make fried chicken, like deep fried chicken, it's kind of like saying, but hot oil is not necessary. I could do it some other way, but then it's not fried chicken, right? It's baked chicken or something else, microwave chicken, whatever you want to call it, but it's not fried chicken. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Except I guess what I'm trying to get at here is if he intended for the constants to be in existence to solve issues related to our three-dimensional world, and then he fine-tuned the constant specifically to allow our life. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not necessary, but he chose to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. And I realize I'm backtracking because I didn't understand. I totally acknowledge that I answered that differently before. So I'm understanding the point.
Okay. Well, then that means that fine tuning isn't evidence of God. It's just evidence of unnecessary complexity. Then wouldn't you agree?
Other than the
if you
fact
could
that
have,
something would have to fine tune against those constants.
Well, like you agreed, if he could have made this universe with just one electron with a mind, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So that means that fine tuning then it's just unnecessary complex. Because if he could have achieved what he and you did, granted, you did say, well, we don't know exactly what the intent is, as Dan, you pointed out too. Yeah. However, if you're looking at it from the lens of, you know, God was doing this to achieve his glory, he could have achieved his glory in a many number of ways. And so the fact that he picked this way to do it, how can you discern for us if it was that this is fine tuning versus versus an accident? You can't. There's just no way.
Well, except I feel like there is an underlying intent that I'd have to know to answer this question.
Well, if you assume it, yeah.
How do we know that?
Yeah, you presuppose it.
Well, I know, but you're postulating against an intent.
Well, I
yes.
just
because
my position is that I don't have.
We can't demonstrate it.
We can't demonstrate. So I postulate it.
Again, if Barney the dinosaur came back from time, right? And I kind of used this before, and I'm being a little facetious, but the idea, right? A dinosaur might say, hey, a smart one would say, hey, there's a lot of dinosaurs on Earth right now. They're all vibing in these different ecosystems. We're doing great. We've existed for millions of years. It seems that the intent was that dinosaurs should exist on Earth, and God loves us, everything. Like a dinosaur should be able to make that conclusion, at least at that period of time, right?
True. I guess if it was self-aware, I guess it could ask that question.
Yeah.
Itself, but,
so that's the anthropic principle.
That's the anthropic principle.
Have a good intent for us. I mean, these are the heavy movers, the big piles of crap everywhere to fertilize. I mean, to key in life better. I mean, there's a lot of different things that dinosaurs did for our planet. I mean, heck, it gives us the carbon fuels we use.
Yes.
In the 20th century, which we.
And that's us looking back, right? But maybe some other future species will look back on us and see what maybe us committing to climate change help better their environment. Right. And that life couldn't exist without us doing our thing. And so they would say, man, that part of humans living, that was part of our design, was for them to do that. You see how that becomes a problem?
Well, it does, except if you do believe in evolution, just throwing this out there. I mean, if you do believe in evolution, which I think all of us do here, I mean, who's to say that we're in our evolved state as our intended state right now? I mean, if humans continue to live,
well, evolution doesn't.
I mean, we could turn into the
point of order.
Electron.
Point of order, John. Evolution doesn't propose intent. Evolution doesn't propose we're in an intended state or we're in a maximal state at all. Evolution just says we're in the state we are because we're in the state we are because of X, Y, and Z. Right? There's no beginning or end.
I agree.
There's evidence that we're still evolving.
Evolution is such a minor, in the whole scale of things, evolution and biological life is not, I
what do you mean it's not?
If I was having to judge evolution on the idea of whether there's a God or not, I guess, evolution would be explanatory to being not needed, but it's all the other things that evolution needs to even exist in the first place. That's kind of where I'm right.
Well, John, I mean, let's think I think you're undervaluing or underselling evolution in this, because think about this. It says a lot about God and how he wants to create things, right? Like if we're the ultimate goal in that, and maybe we're not, but humans tend to think that we're at least part of that plan, then a lot of people had to die, not just people, obviously, but a lot of creatures on Earth had to die to achieve that.
99%.
Right? Yeah. And a lot of the land masses had to change and geology and all that. That's one thing, because we don't attribute sentience to that. But at least a lot of things that had the capacity to feel, and some would dare say think, and some would dare say, reason in some cases, had to die in order for us to get to that point. So it does say something about God and his intent, if we are the intent, if that's part of the process. Wouldn't you agree?
I do agree. I mean, there's where then you get into theologies related to, you know, life and death, and that
Sure.
starts to
But we're talking
flag
about
the
intent. I
scale.
think that's implied, right? If we're using intent as part of our reasoning as to why fine tuning is a valid line of argument, right?
Mm-hmm. But I guess we don't know. I agree with you. There's nothing I'm disagreeing with you about. I'm just trying to say that we would have to know what the ultimate plan is, which we don't necessarily know. I mean, I guess that's where you start to look at theological books to determine what God's intent is. For instance, the Judaic God has an intent which starts at Adam and ends in, you know, whether you believe in a paradise earth or heaven. I mean, there's kind of two ultimate goals with endpoints there. I'm sure other religions have other starts and finishes. So,
and John, I 100% agree with you, and it is part of my problem why it's hard for me to accept fine tuning, because fine tuning for what? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know.
And
it introduces other problems. Like there's the I don't know part. There is the what do you compare it to? We have nothing else to compare it to. And then there's other things like, you know, because you brought up earlier, John, like you're right. There are some systems in here that are pretty amazing, right? Yet then I look at something like our planet is covered with 70% water, right? But 99% of that water we can't drink. It's poisonous to us. And God designed us that we can't go more than 3 days without water. Why would a God do that?
Yeah, it gets into some weird theological sort of conundrums that are hard to answer. But
except I do want to say, and that's, you know, obviously then I could talk about the rain system and the water filtration system and how that advantages the earth, because it gets cleaned in the ocean, or I should say through the evaporation process. And therefore there is kind of a water recycling system, a complex one. Now, why we drink fresh water, you know, I don't, maybe we evolved to drink fresh water. Maybe
why can we just drink salt water?
Maybe in time we will drink salt water. I have no idea, or some version of humans.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you know, even when you point to that, again, there is immense complexity, and it's hard in their innate systems. That's the other thing you got to remember. The biological is different than the inanimate/innate, because the inanimate/innate systems have no development system. There's no steps to development, right? You can't look at that water filtration system and say, oh, well, one day it was just this whatever microclad. I don't have a good thought here. I'm just ad-libbing. But, you know, I think the point of what I'm trying to say is all these systems that we're talking about can't develop over time. They don't have that same kind of structure that life does. So that's where I do point to the inanimate systems.
So I am I think, do you mean emergent systems, not innate systems? Because life relies a lot on physical systems, right? Like life is not divorced from physical systems,
and it relies a lot on those physical systems working. So like this water filtration system you're talking about, it's far from perfect. I mean, we have droughts all the time, you know, and life dies because they can't get enough water. And so what it seems to be is that the water filtration system happens, it goes through its boom and bust cycles, and then life suffers when those boom and bust cycles happen. And then, you know, things die off until it gets to the point where those that do survive can survive on what the water filtration system is producing. And then in another boom cycle, then life starts flourishing again until only for it to bust again. And then things die off again. So that's what it seems to do constantly. And so I'm at a loss as how this is at all intentional.
Well, what I mean is, I could relate it to the water system specifically. It might have been a poor choice, but let's say the magnetic fields that protect the Earth, that we specifically from those radiation fields. I mean, how does that can't develop over time? That's almost accidental to this planet. Like,
why are you saying it can't develop over time?
Why couldn't it develop over time?
Well, how would it develop over time?
Gravity.
What do you mean? Like magnetism? If magnetism exists as a thing, right? Like then it could develop.
The steps.
Yeah.
I guess I've never researched it. Are you saying if I look up magnetic fields and I can see kind of a step-by-step how it forms?
Well, electromagnetism is one of the 4 fundamental forces of the universe, right?
No, but I'm talking about how it protects the Earth related to, because it ties into the tectonic plates. And
the Earth itself is a giant magnet.
Right, exactly.
But we don't see those kind of same protections in other planets that we observe.
And
that's precisely it.
Yeah. Right, because they don't, I mean, like atmospheres and stuff don't develop, and sometimes they do develop, but it's they're very thin, right? So it's not an on-off situation. There's some planets that do have atmospheres, and they do have major geological shifts and changes over time. Mars is a great example of that.
Mars is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I understand, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it has to. We don't see. There's a lot of unique things in Earth, even though we've seen and examined, not up close, but we've examined, millions of different planets through telescopes and all that. We don't see any of those same things at work in any other planet, right? I mean, do we agree with that? Like our moon is very unique only to this planet. We don't see another moon composed the way this moon is in any other instance, yet we see thousands of them. So, I mean, there are several unique things. And I guess going back to this idea, and I may need to research more about
because
electromagnetism. I got maybe a little over my skis on something.
That's okay. I appreciate first of all, because we're not scientists either, man. We're just people who read stuff and we talk on the internet. Okay, we're the lowest of the low. But so I appreciate that we can talk about this, because this is a good opportunity for both of us, I think, to also learn some new information. So I really appreciate this conversation so far. I'm kind of having the tail ended here because we do have to let you go.
Absolutely.
But John, what I do want to say is this has been really, really great. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for spending your Friday night with us.
Thank you guys for what you do.
You've given me the most intelligent defense of the fine tuning argument I have heard probably in years, I would say.
I gotta be honest, this pretty solid.
Excellent. And I love this because I need to examine my own beliefs and see, do they match up with these arguments? And you maybe had to think a little bit on this. I still am hung up on a few things, right? At least from my side, I have to know, if we don't know intent, then how can we know probability, right? How can we know what that's for? And right. And that's a hard one for me to overcome. I'm not sure where trust is at. He was talking about some spiritual electrons. Okay. He's got his own line of argumentation that is creative, but effective, I think, in its own rights. I don't know. This was a great conversation is all I want to say to that. So thank you for spending your time. I hope you call in again in the future.
I will. And for me too, by the way, I'm going to go research. There's several things I'm going to go research. So I appreciate it, guys.
Great. Yeah. We'll let you go for now. John, thank you and have a great rest of your weekend.
Have a good night, John.
You too, guys.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
We spent over 30 minutes on that call. I never do that. And one of the reasons I don't do that is because 30-minute calls aren't interesting. I thought that was pretty interesting though. I think every back and forth was filled with some new stuff going on. You agree with that?
It was. Yeah, totally. And there was still some meat on that bone, because one of the other things I wanted to bring up was because like the comparison thing to me is really still sticking in my craw, because he was saying, because he started with the whole highly improbable, of why we're here. And so then what I wanted to ask, because it occurred to me, I should ask him this question, and it was like towards the end, I wanted to ask him, well, how did you determine the probability that God created the universe, with these fine tuning constants that you're talking about. And of course, he'd probably say something like 100% because God did. Well, how did you calculate that? What was your method of calculating? And this is where the old SE roots come in.
Yeah.
What's your method of calculating that? How did
That
you
goes
do
back
that?
to Roger Penrose's whole argument
Mm-hmm.
with his fine tuning thing. And I'm like, I'm just not the person to critique that too much. I just can't, because I don't know what's right and what's wrong with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a part of it. I do think when we talk, because the reason why I was hung up on the intent thing is because we talk that classically fine tuning is talk. Yeah. Classically fine tuning is talking about the constants specifically, right? The constants of the universe. I believe that's what Roger Penrose was talking about when and basically how and why they are the way that they are. I can't tell you how and why they are the way they are. I'm not sure that anybody really fully can. I can only talk about what happens like afterwards. And if human beings are a part of that whole thing, that seems sus to me, because like we've talked about, a lot of things had to die to get there. A lot of time had to get there. And maybe that doesn't matter to God. Okay, but if that doesn't matter to God, that tells us something about God, right?
Oh, that's another great point you bring up, Dan, is the fact that we've been here for what, 300,000 years?
Yeah.
And the Earth is, or I'm sorry, the universe has been here for 13.8 billion years. So why would we be here for less than a blip of time? All this universe was created for us to be here for just a little tiny blip of time, and why did it take so long? You would think that we would have been here a lot earlier, but it took all this time for us to get here, to be here.
And John was kind of response to that was like, God's like kind of timeless, but like it's less of an can we explain God and more of what's the greater likelihood.
Exactly.
Right?
The greater likelihood.
This is a naturally occurring system or God, because that's what fine tuning is all about at the end of the day, right? It's probability. It's like what is probability of these things happening, and I'm not fully convinced based on what we know that what we have is intentional in any shape or form.
Well,
I don't know.
And the other part is it falls apart at the end of the day, because if you're also looking at, if God could have made this universe any other way, like, I'm going to go back to the spiritual electrons with minds example, right? He could have made it this way, but he decided to do it this way with fine tuning, where 99.9% of life doesn't survive here on one little tiny planet. Yeah, granted, there could be like 8 billion planets, that are Earth-like, around, or I think maybe in the Milky Way or something like that. Somebody can fact check me on that, but that's in comparison to the 700 like septillion planets that they've calculated that's in the entire solar system. It's still like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. Yeah. And so then if we think about it from that standpoint, then we're looking at, okay, that's what that basically means, is that God just bought a shitload of lottery tickets.
Well, yeah, so that's because it goes both ways, because fine tuned people will say, oh, that's how we know that we're special, because look at all the rest of it, because we stick out.
Right.
But
exactly.
It could, like, it goes both ways. So yeah, anyway,
goes exactly the other way. You're absolutely right. 100%.
Another thing, I usually don't like talking too much about a call. Like, I like talking about a little bit after a call, because I don't want to make arguments that our caller can't defend or whatever. Yeah. But John, if you're listening to this, it's not because, like, it's more just because I'm excited about this topic. Really,
yeah, it was really interesting.
It's fine tuning is one of the better arguments.
Agreed.
If I had to make a tier list of arguments for God, fine tuning is up there. I don't know if it's the best. I think it's up. It's like a top 3, maybe top 5.
Specifically the ones that John brought to the table, like those type of arguments. But I've heard some really bad fine tuning arguments. That wasn't one of them.
Yeah, there are different kind of variations. We've already discussed our thoughts on this. I don't know much. I want to keep going on about it, but it's why religion was made at the end of the day, I think, is these conversations right here about creation intent, because every religion has some sort of thing where people are, either a part of that process or an accident in that process, right? But like either way, there's an explanation, and so and this is an attempt at an explanation, which
it just falls short.
You know, I imagine there's nobody who's a fine tuner, right? That says, yeah, these systems were fine tuned, and we don't even matter in that process, right? Like we're the universe is actually fine tuned for some being greater than us. I don't think anybody makes that argument. It's always about how, you know, us at the end of the day and our relationship with God or whatever. Oh, and look at this. We got a super chat, I think, from the gentleman himself. He said, enjoy the conversation. I'll study the counterpoints you brought up, and gave us $10. Wow.
Thanks, John. Wow.
Incredible. What a great conversation. Wow. This was really good. I folks, this took up like pretty much the entire show time today. But I don't feel sorry about it. I thought it was pretty good. What do you think?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it flew by fast. Yeah. And I'm not quite used to this because I usually do like a 20-minute like end time, and then I do like a vote by the chat of who gets to stay and who gets to go. So it went a little bit longer, but it didn't feel like strain. I didn't feel strained at all. It was a great conversation.
I quite enjoyed it.